If we can get everybody to head back to their seats, we'll start the education panel. All right, well, I'm Lenny Jarrett. I'm the project manager for education reform at the Heartland Institute. With me today, I've got Nick Novak from the MacIver Institute in Wisconsin, State Rep Jeanne Ives from Illinois, and Michael Chartier from Friedman Foundation in Indianapolis. And we're going to talk a little bit about school choice, federal intrusion, kind of the state policies, what's working, what's not working. And I had one question this morning on what was an ESA. So I'd like to kind of start with a little bit about some of the terms you may hear so everybody's a little bit more familiar. An ESA is an education savings account. You might hear STC, which is a scholarship tax credit. Pretty much everybody's probably familiar with the word vouchers. And I'm sure we'll get into charter schools, but also the parent trigger. So when we get to the time where you guys will have a chance to ask questions as well. But I'll open it up and start here with Michael and let y'all go around here and tell us a little bit about what's happening in Indiana. Indiana's got like multiple school choice programs.
Yeah, we do. We've got a income tax deduction for families that send their kids to private school. They can receive a deduction on their state income tax. That's the first one. The second one is we also have a tax credit scholarship program where low income and well, even more middle income families then can receive a scholarship from a nonprofit to send their kids to a school of their choice. And companies or individuals will then make donations to a nonprofit and they will receive a 50% Indiana state income tax credit for those donations. And then we also have the fastest growing voucher program in the country. I think just recently now, I think we've got about 33,000 kids that are that are receiving a voucher to go to a private school of their choice. The voucher amount was just raised from $4,800 in the K through 8 level to 90% of whatever the per pupil spending would be. That was just passed in this last session. And then it's also 90% in the high school level. So it's one of the fastest growing programs in the country. And I would predict next year will probably be the largest voucher program in terms of raw numbers in the country. It is the largest program in terms of overall K through 12 population.
Jeanne?
Sure, I'll just give a few comments about a state that arguably has school choice but really no school choice. So we're listed among the states that have school choice, but that's simply because we offer a $500 tax credit to individuals on their individual tax return. Otherwise, we do not have any voucher program or anything like that. There was a real push, it seemed, last year to possibly do something with school choice, considering that Governor Rauner got elected. And in fact, there was a really prominent Wall Street Journal article saying that look to Illinois to be the next bastion for school choice, and specifically saying that 2 black Democrat senators were going to get behind this reform. Well, that actually went nowhere in the state. There has been a talk about doing some sort of tax credit for corporations and private individuals to give to scholarship granting institutions. That bill has gone nowhere. People are still hoping that it gets incorporated with a final budget. We have no budget right now in the state of Illinois. We're 3 months behind in actually getting a budget, so we continue to pile up debt. Now, the problem in Illinois is that we are so behind in terms of payments that passing a tax credit for corporations becomes politically almost impossible, and here's why. Because you're seen as giving corporations and wealthy individuals tax breaks and not to other folks. So we need to look at school choice in a different way in Illinois, because I don't think until our budget is back on track that goes anywhere at all. But I want to talk about school choice in one other realm. And that's the fact that wealthy individuals still have school choice in the state of Illinois. If you can afford to pay for private education, we have a plethora of really good private school options. And I reside in Wheaton, where you can go to Bennett Academy or St. Francis or Wheaton Academy, all Christian-based high schools that provide a fabulous education. And Arnie Duncan, please take note. Please take note of this. Arnie Duncan, who we actually gave to the federal government to run education, has now decided to relocate his family from Washington, D.C. back to Chicago. So Arnie Duncan put his own children in the University of Chicago laboratory schools. The private tuition cost there is $30,000 a year. So Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, did not send his kids to a Chicago public school, did not expose them to PARCC testing, did not put them into a situation where they're learning Common Core state standards or anything like that. No, no, no. Or even a unionized teacher environment. Arnie Duncan sent his kids to a private school that costs $30,000 a year. So if you have the income in Illinois, we have school choice for you. If you don't, you are left to fester in the public school system.
Yeah, real quick before Nick, that's one of the things that most people don't realize. They always say school choice helps the more affluent the most, when in actuality that's untrue because they already have choice. It really helps the low income and the ones that are disadvantaged. So, Nick, I know Wisconsin has the longest running voucher program in the country, so.
Yeah, so and even if Wisconsin didn't have a great school choice program, both with vouchers, with charters, going after Illinois, anything I say now will be absolutely fantastic. So we do have the longest running program in Milwaukee. It's a very successful program that we have in Milwaukee. More than 20,000 students practice choice every single year in that city. And if you look at the public schools compared to the voucher schools, they actually did a study a few years back to see where are the schools, are they competing, are the voucher schools actually being successful? And this was an academic study done by the University of Arkansas, and they found that not only were the choice schools actually performing relatively the same to what the public schools were, they had higher graduation rates, they had students that were more likely to go to college, more likely to stay in college, and that's obviously something that we need to continue to push because you can't just say, you're going to school, okay, then once you graduate, we're done with you. We need to be making sure that students are college and career ready. And we've really seen that the voucher program in Milwaukee has seen that. Outside of that, they expanded to Racine, just south of Milwaukee, a few years back. And we actually just got our first statewide program in a couple years ago, and they just once again expanded that. So by the end of the next decade, Wisconsin will have statewide school choice for pretty much everyone in the state, which is just a tremendous feat to accomplish. So a lot of great things are happening in the state on the voucher side, but also on the charter school side. We have a lot of independent charter schools, which, as much as I say it in Wisconsin, there's still people that don't get it. Charter schools are public schools. Yes. But it is a form of school choice because you do have a different option, and especially with the independent charter schools, because independent charter schools don't operate under the auspice of the local school board and typically don't have the unions that are going to be coming in and telling you how to teach, what the teachers can do. You know, you must have a 15-minute break here and all of that. It really allows for a lot more innovation, and the city of Milwaukee is actually one of the only places that we have those independent charter schools right now that can get authorized by someone outside the school board. And those schools are performing leaps and bounds ahead of their traditional public schools, and they're getting, in some cases, half of the funding that those local school districts are. So school choice really is working, not only in Wisconsin, but in other states as well, and I think it's a story that hopefully we'll get to talk a lot more about today.
Yeah, during the expansion fight this year, I did see that one of the schools in Milwaukee Public Schools actually had 0% of proficient in reading, yet they were fighting against school choice.
Yes, there's our school district, AUER, I believe is how it's pronounced, and not only is their proficiency rating 0, it's not a statistical 0, it is actually 0. There are 0 students who can read at a proficient level at the school in Milwaukee, and there were students, parents, teachers, at least they claimed they were students, parents, and teachers, protesting the possibility of turning this school over to a charter authorizer who would then close the school, reopen it as a charter school, and try to maybe get at least one student who can read.
And what was the cost per student? Do you happen to know what that was?
In Milwaukee, you are looking around $13,000 to $14,000 per student, whereas the charter schools are only getting around.
I think you just need more money to raise that proficiency level.
Yeah, and then we'd be just fine.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, when you have people who are trying to say that no, this school that has 0 kids that can read is a good thing, and they're unwilling to try anything else, it's really hard to try and fight against that. But it is turning in Wisconsin fairly quickly, and 5 years ago, I would not have thought a statewide school choice program was possible in Wisconsin, or a charter school expansion, and we've done both of those. So who knows? Maybe Illinois, maybe you guys are getting closer.
Well, I'd just like to remark here, I mean, I'm the mother of 5 children, and my kids went through K through 8th grade at the local Catholic school, and we have done public education for high school. And so I live in a district where you have great AP teachers, you have great environment for the kids to be raised in, and it's no problem with me. But I literally have a family who lives in my district, and they have 3 children. They chose a different school for each one of their 3 children at the high school level. 2 of them went private, different private schools. The other one went to a public school. So what does this tell you? Again, once again, if you've got the dollars, you can choose private school, and oftentimes, or you can choose a school that fits your child, and oftentimes it is a public school. Mm-hmm. So that's what choice is about. It's not about necessarily saying all public schools are bad. That's not true. They certainly aren't. But they should be able to, people should be able to compete and have their child be met at the needs that child wants. Whoa. Okay.
One of the other things that's happening this year, well, we saw in different states, Nevada passed a universal education savings account bill it'll affect 93% of the students there, which is a great thing. It's being challenged in court. There's 2 court cases now. We've also seen Douglas, Colorado, their scholarship program got ruled unconstitutional by the Colorado Supreme Court. That's heading to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then in Washington, there's a couple of rulings there. They ruled charters actually unconstitutional, and they're also telling the legislature they have to put more money into the regular public schools. So I'd like you guys especially talk a little bit about that, what's happening in other states. I know Illinois has one of the Blaine amendments, which is where some of those rulings are going to be coming from. So all the state legislators out here, Blaine amendments are in 37 states. So it's an issue that legislators will have to deal with.
So I know that the Friedman Foundation, the organization that I represent, we worked very heavily in Nevada to help pass the education savings account there. And like you said, it's 93% of all students in the state, 100% of all students in the public schools are eligible for the ESA, either at $5,100 if your family is above the free and reduced price lunch level, or $5,700 if you are below free and reduced price lunch and special needs. So it's really game-changing there, and they're even talking of trying to expand it in the future. But in terms of the court cases, there are 2. One was filed by the ACLU of Nevada. They challenged, I think, in Las Vegas, and they focused on Blaine, the Blaine amendments there. Their plaintiffs were taxpayers, so they went for taxpayer standing. There's another foundation there in Nevada. I think it's Educate Nevada Now, but I think it was them that filed the other lawsuit. They have parents of public school students who are suing, and they're saying that's going to drain money from the public school and those sorts of things. But they also focus a lot on the Blaine Amendment there. And the Blaine Amendment essentially in Nevada states that no money can be used for any sectarian purpose, which is rather interesting. I'm not a lawyer, but the lawyers tell me that's interesting because an education savings account is purely for educational purposes. None of this is and none of the allowed expenses for education savings accounts, of which there's private school tuition, tutoring, textbooks, curriculum, testing, special needs support therapies. You can even use it for transportation, up to $750 in Nevada if you need to get your kid to a different school through bus services or something. Those are all education services. None of them are sectarian, and I'm Catholic, and so I would send my kids to Catholic schools. Sectarian was code for Catholic schools back in the late 1800s. James Blaine. So it's pretty clear that I think that these programs will at least stand in Nevada. I don't think they're going to have a leg to stand on. But this is the process that we have set up. The process is going to work. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will make a ruling on these sorts of things.
Well, and in Illinois, it's interesting to use that argument would almost be difficult in terms of saying that you can't use that for a sectarian school. Because we have MAP grants at the higher ed level, right. And certainly you can take that MAP grant absolutely anywhere that you want to, and it doesn't matter. So I think that the argument falls on that alone.
The same for Medicaid and stuff too. They can also go to religious hospitals and stuff like that. It's the same principle behind those.
Well, one of the biggest things that we run into with this discussion is that if you say that these are public dollars and now you're using it to go to a private entity, and so you need to essentially treat private schools as if they're public schools and make them go through all the same rules and regulations that a public school would. And our argument back at that is, so if you receive Medicaid, if you receive food stamps, and then you go to a private hospital or a private grocery store, are we now saying that we need to start regulating those in the same way that you would regulate a public entity? And no one ever really seems to have an answer for that, because that's a program. No, those are good programs. These are taken away from teachers or something. And so it's a constant battle that I think we've helped to turn the tide by looking at labor reforms in Wisconsin, especially with the public employee unions, because if you take away their power on that, then they no longer have the ability to push their agenda essentially to stop any sort of school choice, and that's something that's worked in Wisconsin very well.
So I'd like to pick up on that a little bit, because last spring in the state of Illinois we had a huge issue with park testing, which we are one of 9 states now, or maybe 11.
It's actually 7 actually. A couple have dropped out. It's down to 7 now.
Okay, we're down to 7 who are doing park testing, where initially it started at 15 or 16, maybe even as high as 18. My colleague Bob Pritchard might know, he's in the audience there. But we were always told, look, if we get behold a threshold of like 12, we're not going to be able to fund a park assessment, because just a lot of supply and demand, and the cost is going to go up. But we did park testing, and it became very controversial. And it became controversial from a union perspective, because they knew that this testing was eventually going to also lead to an assessment of the teacher. And we put in reforms that had to link sort of performance to teacher tenure and other things. And so they didn't want the park test for that reason. Parents were upset with the park test. Even district administrators who initially said park testing is just something we can't afford, we can't monitor it, you can't replace it with the ACT because colleges don't accept the ACT. Anyway, it had a lot of problems with the park testing. In the end, we did end up park testing. The results have been abysmal. I won't go into that. But there was a bill that came forward that basically allowed parents to opt out of this sort of state testing. And it became an issue where even Republicans like I were coalescing around something that the CTU is in favor as well, and multiple unions. And so I think that if you could draw them into the bigger picture of what's happening in their school with all the federal mandates, the state mandates and everything, you can start to maybe start a wedge between what parents are experiencing and having to go through, teachers individually are having to go through, and perhaps a school choice environment.
Yeah, there's a lot of mandates. Everybody talks about local control. It's really almost a myth that there is local control with all the state and federal mandates. And I was talking to a gentleman this morning from Nebraska. They did not adopt Common Core, but Common Core aligned curriculum is being brought into their schools based on the other states, Texas and California, and the way the curriculums and stuff are written. So I know each of, Indiana, I believe, was the first to drop out of the Common Core state standards. Illinois is all in. Wisconsin actually left it up to the school districts themselves to opt in or opt out with no financial penalties and stuff. Do you guys want to weigh in on the Common Core and how that's kind of affecting your states a little bit more from the ground?
Well, I mean, we did drop out of Common Core. They rewrote the standards in Indiana, and to be honest with you, I haven't quite followed how that's gone. But I did want to talk a little bit how some of the mandates and regulations affect school choice. Right. And I think one of the dirty secrets of school choice that I'm letting you guys all in on is that there are some states that don't that haven't they've passed school choice, but they haven't quite gotten their act together. And one of those states is Louisiana. If you take a look at all of the regulations that the state has put upon the statewide voucher program there, it was originally in New Orleans and then it passed statewide. If you take a look at the number of private schools that there are in Louisiana and how many of the schools participate in the voucher program, it's only 31%. Only 31% of the private schools in the state of Louisiana are taking part in the voucher program, and that surprises people because everyone thinks that, oh, it's free money, you need to let all these kids in, but they don't want the rules and regulations that are coming along with that because they don't want to look like the public schools that these kids are leaving for. And to counter that with Indiana, 71% of the schools in Indiana accept voucher students because we found a much better balance of regulation and reporting than our friends down south in Louisiana. So one of the things I would mention is just if you guys are looking for school choice in some of your states, be mindful of what some of the regulations are and realize that some of those do come at a cost. And reach out to private schools and ask them what their thoughts on all those sorts of things are.
Right, I know that's also an issue with the ESAs and stuff coming out, also more of the federal intrusion, how they're trying to mandate some of that on top of the private schools and stuff as well.
So I think anytime you talk about this, really the idea of competition and a free market in education is really where you have to get. You have to get to the point where really parents are making the best decision for their child and deciding where to send them. So in Illinois, I've even heard from my own diocese, folks in my diocese rather, they're like, we don't want a voucher program because we don't want to accept any of the rules that the state may impose on us. And yet those state rules have not even been written, yet they are sure that they're coming. So as we move forward in Illinois with this idea, I mean, that's why the tax credit idea is really valuable because it is simply a tax credit. And if you could expand that enormously, then you could get some, you would not have any of the problems that you have in Illinois. That being said, Illinois is one of the best states for homeschoolers.
Yes, it is.
So we already do have a track record of not interfering when parents want to make that choice. And I would hope that as we write the rules further for vouchers or ESAs, that would happen.
Well, I think on expanding on that point a little bit, the thing that really needs to get focused on is you can have the best school choice program in the country. You can have a great charter school program. You can have a great public school program. And if there isn't parental involvement, if there's not that urge to say you need to pay attention to what your kids are doing and look out for what's best for them, none of it's going to work. And so we really do need to change the culture of, instead of just saying, well, I'll just send my kids to school and it's a good school so they'll be fine. We really do need to ensure that there is that parental involvement and making sure that teachers aren't just going to class every day, teaching the kids and then moving on. They need to be talking with parents and talking with students and saying, how can we best help these individual students? And I think that's where school choice comes in the most. If you get past all the regulations, if you get past all this, if you have a parent that is truly involved and they're going to find the best school for their child, that child will be successful in that school. And that's the conversation I think that we really need to get towards, is making sure that there is parental involvement, and how do we go into places like Chicago, like Milwaukee, like Detroit, DC, and get that message across to those individuals.
I understand that, but in Illinois, that results in spending thousands upon, even millions of dollars on something called the parent mentoring program, where you embed low-income parents into the school system and teach them how to be parent mentors to other people's children. And I think that's not something that I want to support or go for. I think that's had marginal results and things like that.
Yeah, well, there is a study that you guys may not know about yet being done at the University of Chicago on multiple different rewards, and there's just the control group, but they're also doing money. They're giving money to schools to see how they can improve internally. But one of the options they're looking at is actually rewarding parents. They give the parents a set of goals, and if their kids come into school and meet those goals, then they're giving money directly to the parents. And they're looking at their studies about 5 years in, I believe, and the results actually, from what I've been hearing, are very dramatic. I'm trying to get as Dr. List at UIC to talk about that a little bit more, what his results are, but showing that rewards, actually increasing the parental involvement, is actually showing great dividends, and it's a whole lot cheaper than some of the other methods and stuff. Something for us to look into a little bit more.
So does that mean when the paper comes home and you're signing off that you saw the test result? I mean, I think that that's what that means.
No, it's actually the kids going to the school, and the schools are having to sign off that the kid knows what they're supposed to be. So yeah,
Okay.
it's a controlled study right now, so we have to see how the results actually come out. But it's looking promising from what I'm hearing out of there. So something else to think about down the road.
Well, and as we go down this idea of social engineering kids in public schools, which I do firmly believe is happening. I mean, in Illinois, we've got multiple bullying programs and bills that have passed about that. We've got comprehensive sex ed starting in 6th grade. You know, we've got all sorts of programs that deal with school security and, you know, all sorts of internet stuff that you can't do this, you can't do that. We've even gone into the realm of possibly, you know, looking at your home internet and what you've been doing there in terms of cyberbullying. So, you know, we've got all these sorts of things. And now we also have something called social emotional learning.
Yes.
Learning standards, social emotional learning standards. And how that trickles down to the curriculum in the schools and what's being taught is very troublesome to me.
Yes, it is.
And that's why you need to even more school choice so parents can decide if that's appropriate for their child's environment, that that's the environment they want them to grow up in or not. Or do you want me to be the social emotional learning standard in my family?
Yeah, many legislators, especially Illinois, is one of those that they're focusing more on fixing the current system rather than changing the system and looking at focusing on the child. And right now the focus is on the system instead of on the child. One of the things I've seen that Friedman has done, I was going to tell you, you guys did a report a couple of years ago here talking about the trends in hiring and how the administrators are growing, that class is growing so much faster than the teachers, or is over almost triple what the students are. So you can get into a little bit of that with this.
Yeah, so we produced a report. It's called The Staffing Surge. It's on our website, edchoice.org. Go there and you can find our research. And basically what it shows is that from 1950 to 2011, I think it was the last year that data was available, student population has grown by about 96%. Teacher population went up about 200%. And the administrator population exploded. About 786% was the growth in administrator population. We're actually doing a follow-up study to that. That was the economic downturn. So student population went up a bit, teacher population actually went down, but administrator population, surprisingly enough, grew just a little bit. Didn't go down, it grew just a little bit. So the joke, the name of the joke name of the study, this will not be the real name, but the joke name of the study is flip a coin, heads teachers win, tails head teachers lose, tails administrators win. So it's about the growth in that. But one of the things I wanted to go back to talk about, that we were talking about parental empowerment, that there's no better way to get parents involved in schools, though, by giving them a choice in their child's education. I mean, it's the most basic fundamental thing that parents would have in direct relation to their child. But one of the things I wanted to kind of ask the audience, kind of raise everyone's hands, is who thinks that competition is good for schools? Who thinks that competition leads to better results? Okay, everyone does. Well, my job's done up here, right?
Just take the mics off.
Yeah, take the mics off, drop the mic. But the one of the things I want to ask the question of everyone here is that what are we trying to do with school choice? I mean, what's the ultimate goal? Do you guys think it's better education for kids? Raise your hand if you think that's better education for kids. Okay, we got a couple hands. One of the things that I would want to say is that while that's true, we are here to empower parents. The conversation in schooling right now in America is about who has power, who doesn't, and how to give people access to that power. And I think that school choice is the best way to do that. Not only empowering parents, though, we're not here to change, as you had just mentioned, we're not here to fix the current system, although we want to do that. We want to fix the public school system. But we're also here to broaden that system. We want to empower entrepreneurs to come in. It's all about people who have access to power and getting more people access to that power. We're not here, in the last group, they talked about slicing up the pie. We're here to grow the pie. We want more parents empowered. We don't want to redistribute the amount of power. We want to grow the amount of power. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to fundamentally shape who has power and give people more access to that power.
Yep, one thing that struck me earlier, too, we were talking about Blockbuster, Redbox, and how movies get distributed. The same thing can be said of education. We have had the schoolhouse, where you go into the schoolhouse since the 18th, 19th century here, And now you've got all this online education, there's Khan Academy, there's all the different models. There's actually kids helping other kids learn in India. So there's a whole new market out there that could be opened up if governments kind of just get rid of the control out of the current system to open it up to other avenues. You never know what's going to come forth.
Well, yeah, in Wisconsin, we have quite a few virtual schools that operate all around the state, and many people have found great success through those virtual schools. And for a lot of kids who may not be able to perform as well in a social setting, in a grade school or high school, it helps them to develop their education side of it on a much greater level, and then maybe slowly get into that social side if they're not as comfortable with it. And it has been a huge help for a lot of students here, and not only in K through 12, but in higher education, you're seeing a whole lot of educational activities and learning online as well. So
Stanford and MIT, I think, pretty much have almost all their classes online. You don't get credit for them, but you can't. Well, if you pay for it in Stanford, you can get credit.
Yep.
But they're online. You can go learn whatever you want, even if you don't want the degree.
So Illinois does have a virtual
Yes.
school too, and we also have a virtual school specifically in Chicago, and people can access those things. We also did pass a bill that essentially said, look, if there's a school day, you can access education online. If there's a snow day, you can access education online up to like 3 days
And
out
that
of
was
the year.
limited, I believe, to certain school districts?
Yeah, I believe it's limited, but you know, it's a start. We do recognize that there's online learning. In fact, I was with a number of districts who have, as a consortium, put together an online learning environment for particular individuals. So we're not completely backwards there, but you know, I guess it's what you want for your child. Do you want online learning all the time? Do you want a hybrid program? Do you want it as a supplemental? Again, this is where you parents should be empowered to choose the mix of educational options that they need for their particular child and the environment that they want them to grow up in.
And one of the biggest things that I hear from parents who homeschool is that the virtual learning has been a huge help to them, because there's certain subjects that maybe there's that supplemental information that they just didn't have access to before, but they still wanted to do the homeschooling program, and having those virtual classes has really helped them. So you can actually start combining the different ways in which kids learn in your state.
Right.
And again, it's
So,
all
yeah,
love.
my brother homeschools his 4 children out in Galesburg, and one of his daughter is now going to be an online instructor for a homeschooling program. So
yeah, personally, I actually had my kids go to public school, private school, and I end up homeschooling the most. So, and they're both in college right now. So, does Indiana have virtual schools?
We do have virtual schools. I know there is a virtual public school. I think that there is Connections Academy. There is a virtual charter school as well. I know that there's at least one, if not more.
I was going to say, does Indiana actually not have something that Illinois has?
No. Although I don't know what our homeschool laws are. You might beat us that.
We're one of the best.
Yeah, Illinois is one of the best homeschooling laws. Indiana's a little more restrictive, but it's not bad.
Okay.
But Illinois is one of the best in the country. Your homeschoolers in Illinois basically considered a private school is how they work here. So.
Yeah.
I would like to say, does any of you have anything specific else that we haven't covered yet that you would like to specifically cover?
I just wanted to cover the fact that the federal incentives to school districts and the state programs are really what drives a lot of education spending. In Illinois, you know, our budget between state and federal is, you know, just over $10 billion. $3 billion of that comes from the federal government. But we are always, when we sit down as an education appropriations committee, and we go down through the budget, the first thing we know we have to fund are the mandated categoricals from the federal government, whether it's English language learners, whether it's the free lunch program. That's $775 million right there. But they've also added on to the mandated categorials, they've added on the Race to the Top dollars. That was a $42 million for us. And then essentially they're trying us to buy into like a $200 million hit to our education budget over the next 4 years. And the way they do this and the way they sell it is they say, we're going to give you $20 million in early education dollars, but you need to spend $25 million the first year, an additional $50 million the next year, an additional $50 million the year after, and then another additional $50 million. By the time you're up to that, you're getting $80 million from the federal government, but you're having to spend, you know, in that 4th year, $200 million to get that $120 million that particular year. So the program's enormous. I mean, that's how you grow your budget $500 million in 4 years, by accepting federal money. And this enticement, this thing like, well, it's going to help solve this budget hole, or we can pander to that interest group that wants early education childhood. You know, everybody sucked into it. Even my home district was a beneficiary of that program that they did buy in for the first year to getting that free money.
I was just going to say, it's free money, so take it, of course, clearly.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on that again, states go to the federal governments because they're the ones that have the money. I mean, you know, you rob the bank,
and
right?
They can write some more money if they want to.
Exactly, they can print more money. I think we should. I mean, we should empower parents by giving them the same funds and letting schools go after parents. But again, we need to be mindful of the strings that come attached with those things.
Absolutely right.
If I get to leave you guys with one thing, it's be mindful of those things. Those things have consequences and costs.
Yeah. If we're truly going to have a localized system in which we are going to be empowering parents and the local school districts and even school boards, yeah, you definitely need to get the federal government, not only just the regulations, but the monetary incentives that they force upon these school districts. You need to somehow get those out of the way, or have school districts start to say, well, no, we'll do things the way we want to and say no to the money, which I don't think has ever happened in the history of the world. But it's definitely something that it does need to continue to be pushed, that we need to get more on a local front and empower those parents to make those decisions.
All right, we'll open up the questions. Make sure you have the microphone before you speak.
Good morning, Ed Emery, Missouri Senate. I guess just to kind of follow up on what Michael was saying, I've heard people say that parents who've never been involved in their children's K through 12 will pore over college catalogs because they got a choice. So have we seen any kind of measurable indication that choice is getting more parents involved, or getting parents more involved in their kids' education?
Sure, there are studies out there that do indicate that, and if I'm correct, that is essentially a settled science at this point. That there are two factors that are sort of unequivocal about school choice. One, that parents are more involved, and two, parents are more satisfied. So no one denies that. Even on the other side, people that hate school choice, no one denies those 2 points anymore.
Yeah, they actually stopped most of the filming of the lotteries for school choice because of the parents crying on both sides, happy that they won the lottery, and those disappointed that they didn't get in.
Todd Russ with the Oklahoma Legislature. I don't want to be the black sheep in the group here. I'm certainly a conservative, but I represent a large rural district in Midwest states all across your service area. You probably deal with this from the rural school perspective. When you talk about empowering parents in these rural small communities, they don't know what you're talking about. They don't have a problem. They're proud of their local school. As far as school choice for my region and my district, there's no such thing. I mean, we have 2 schools in the west half of the entire state, half the state that might be considered a private school. So that subject matter, it's hard for me to go into the Capitol and vote a hardline vote sometimes, and I'm not saying I don't, but I'm just, I guess I'm just trying to cry out to the industry to know how to position ourselves in these rural communities where the only thing they have is the local school system that they're proud of. The outcomes are reasonably well. If it wasn't for the homeschoolers, they wouldn't know that there was anything but the public education system. And I'm not saying it's perfect. There are a lot of things that need to be addressed about it, but for them to go argue or petition for rights to choice, they don't have. It's non-existent. It's not a possibility because there's no other choice. So it makes it really hard. When you get ready to go out and get reelected in your campaign and getting beat up by the unions or the superintendents because you had this weird, bizarre idea. Where did you get that? And what what private school are you talking about? So it gets really tough. And I just feel like for rural legislators that issue needs to be brought up.
So could I take that one on? So I live just in the western suburbs here, in arguably one of the richest counties in the state of Illinois, if not in the nation. And you know, we have the same issue. Suburban people like their public schools, there's no doubt. I also probably have, at any point, 15% of the student population in my district is actually served by private school choices. So I fight that same thing that you would as a rural district, because we're very, very proud of our public schools. And in fact, we're really proud of our football champions too. You know, so there's no doubt, you know, we have a long legacy of football championships at Wheaton Warrenville South and all this other stuff. So that's important as well. And I face the same problems that you face in the rural district. So the way that we would start a voucher program really would be to reflect upon the lowest performing 10% of the kids that are educated in Aurora, Rockford, Chicago, just East St. Louis state districts that are arguably failing. And I tell my superintendents, look, this program's not really for you, but you guys can compete anyway. And why could you cannot assign them based on income level and zip code the level of schooling that they get. So I don't know, I think that you got to reframe your argument to them and say, look, people should deserve a choice. They have a choice with all sorts of other things, and they deserve a choice in education. That's me.
I was going to say, we go back and forth with this in Wisconsin a lot, because essentially if you go north of the Wisconsin Dells, your trees and a couple people here and there. That's you know, essentially what northern Wisconsin is, which I love going there for vacation and everything. But you're right, the rural districts, they do see it a lot differently, and I hear from parents and teachers who are confused on why the school choice movement is pushed so much. And I think the issue is that it gets pushed as saying we are creating a second school system. You have your public education system, and then you have your private voucher system. And the unions and teachers and superintendents have done an extremely good job of saying that we have two separate systems. You're either with public schools or you're against public schools. And I think we need to change that argument, because I went to public schools my whole life, from kindergarten up through graduating from college. And I loved it. I had a great public school education. However, it's not possible for every single person to go through that same system. And so I think if you start arguing, instead of having two separate systems, if you argue that it's all going to be the same system and get to that freedom and choice aspect, Nevada did a great job with the educational savings accounts, pointing out that the money should follow the child. The money is not going to a system. We should not be funding buildings. We should not be funding administrators that grow at 786%. Yeah. It needs to be going to that child's education. And I think if you can get the argument back to that, even if there isn't a private school in the area, virtual schools are becoming increasingly popular in northern Wisconsin. There are so many students who are going from their traditional public school to virtual public schools and virtual public charter schools. And so I think if you get that argument back to the child and his or her individual education, it'll go a lot farther than trying to argue on the merits of, is this system better than this system?
Right. You also got this issue with special needs or kids with autism and stuff like that, that also school choice helps with them. But one of our senior fellows actually has 4 words for this: fund children, not systems.
Thank you. I'm Ron Alting from Indiana. I had the pleasure of serving with Mitch Daniels. Also, I represent Purdue University, so I'm still stuck with the former governor there.
You can't get rid of him.
I would just say, and I'm former assistant chairman of the Education Committee, just a couple comments. Respectfully, I disagree with children of needs. In Indiana, the children with high needs in terms of disabilities, and I'll redefine it, disabilities, do not go to the voucher system and do not go to the charter schools, and in most cases do not accept them. They're what I call, and I mean this respectful, the leftovers that's still in the public school system. So I totally disagree with you on that. And what I want to say to my colleagues, when you implement these programs, you was right. What you got to be careful of, so you don't have a division of public schools, vouchers, and charters, is be more compassionate. We have deserved that reputation in most cases because, and we did in Indiana, we used the baseball bat approach, and tried to sneak in legislation that really damaged the existing leftover public school to put it towards the charter and to the voucher. And I don't think that Donald Trump approach works. I think in education that when you promote, and we've got the most open enrollment in vouchers in the whole country. I mean, you can make a lot of money, you can do a lot of things, and that's fantastic. I am all for choice of parents. But I just think that we need to be, as Republicans, particularly as Republicans, more compassionate on how we sell this. And for instance, sometimes we put our blinders on. We got 68% of our charter schools with D's and F's in Indiana. That's not something good. But we are so Republican and we are so for choice that we're not doing much to look into that and better that. We got systems in place that if you continue to fail, we'll pull the charter. But boy, you got to be there a long time and do a bad job in order to get that. We deserve to do better than that. And I guess my final comments is I have met with Mitch Daniels when he was governor. We have done a great job that I support on public education reform. We have put restrictions and tests on teachers and guidelines on teachers and what they've got to do, but we don't have the same requirements, which is to your case, on the vouchers to the private schools. And I said to the governor, if it's that important that we've got to train or we've got to put a teacher to accountability on a test in the public schools, if it's good enough for that, then why don't we do that in the private schools? And I'll simply close that we have had charters and vouchers a long time in Indiana. And I pleaded with this governor and chairman of the Education Committee. Certainly, there are things that are working out there in those two entities. And if they are, why don't we bring that back and implement it in all of our schools, for all of our kids, primarily in the rural areas that you said are struggling in that, the inner city schools that are leftovers. I mean, it's tough. So I'm sorry I'm going on this, but I'm very compassionate about all of our kids. And I'm like you, I don't want to start classifying it, but unfortunately in Indiana, we're doing that. And I say that as a Republican who supports this, but we put these blinders on because, you know, and of course we have power because we control everything, both chambers, super majorities, and a Republican governor. But I just think we need to be more compassionate and look at what's left over, which is a terrible term, of our kids in our public schools, and don't forget them. Just don't forget them.
Sir, you have just made the perfect argument for why we need a more open and a more competitive market environment for education. Because by doing so, by not having the same sorts of testing requirements in one system and not the other system, by not allowing D or F charter schools to exist and go on until finally the system corrects itself or they're pulled. What you have just told me is that more competition where parents decide that their parents are going to know if their kids are failing or how they're doing compared to other school systems. And it won't take them that long to figure that out. And if you open up the system more, and you know what? In terms of teacher testing, I'm not a real fan of over-testing on that either. I'm not really a fan of some of the reforms that Illinois has put forward in terms of metrics on teachers and all that. I'll be honest with you. You know why? Because the principal sets the tone and the culture of the school, and the principal should be forced to be accountable for all the results in that school. That is the leadership position in a school system. But until you open up the market and allow that to happen naturally, and the results to show for themselves, and whether testing for the teachers is good or bad or not, and hold people accountable, you're always going to have this problem. So I say it's more competition that's needed, not less. Less regulation, not more.
Bob Pritchard. Bob Pritchard from Illinois. You made a comment a moment ago that choice gives the parents, gets them more engaged in education. It seems to me that we have parents that are engaged and parents that aren't engaged. Does your research show that having more choice gets those kinds of parents engaged? Or does it just affect that set that already is engaged?
The research, I should say that we haven't, the Friedman Foundation hasn't actually done the research. There are other entities out there, other universities out there that have done that. And they do show that over all sectors of parents, however you would want to measure that, everyone does become more engaged when they do make choices for their children. So, and I think there was one study, and I can get you the studies, but there's even one study that showed, though, that by parents having an option to, I'm trying to say try to phrase it correctly. So the default option was to turn down school choice and go to your traditional public school. When they framed it that way, that you had to make a positive decision to go back to the public school or to stay in the public school, their engagement actually went up. So I can't say off the top of my head how large of a difference that made, yeah. But I do know that there was a difference, and it was statistically significant. Thank you.
Hi. Hello.
Yep,
Is it working? Yeah, I'm Mark Weiermiller. I'm just a small-time grassroots taxpayer advocate who's looking for some compassion also. So my thoughts are, I'm hoping the legislators here would maybe opt out of any kind of federal programs. I'd like to eliminate the Department of Education and make it more of a states' rights issue as far as education goes and get the federal government out. So specifically today in Chicago, a few miles from the new Heartland headquarters, there's a big teacher strike in Prospect Heights. So in my area, like Jeanne's, we're in a so-called rich, I'm a poor person in a rich district. Our teacher salaries are $91,000 plus benefits. It's out of control. So my question is, public sector unions, to me, is the #2 issue in the country after national defense. How can we get these public sector unions not taking so much money for education and like I say, have some compassion for me as a taxpayer?
You do what we did in Wisconsin. It's definitely not something that's going to happen overnight. Unless, well, Wisconsin was kind of overnight. It just kind of lasted a lot longer than that. But yeah, essentially you need to take the power away from the big government special interests that have the control. I actually worked for Scott Walker back when he was running for governor in 2010, and then when he in his administration for a short time. And he always told a story about how he would go to these meetings when he was a county executive where they would discuss salaries and benefits and you know, what was the step increase going to be for the next year, what were they going to do on all this just for county employees. And it used to be that he could tell you had the union was giving the money to Democrats or to the ones who were on their side, and then they were going and sitting at that table with them to negotiate everything. And then in turn, that person was going right back to the union member and saying, okay, yeah, we'll give you the step increase that you wanted. And it was a circle that just kept going back and forth. And even as county executive, he would veto things and the county board would come right back, override his veto, and there was essentially nothing he could do. And so to get that power away, you need to change how collective bargaining works. And in Wisconsin, we had Act 10, which was just an absolute windfall for taxpayers. Not only did it give the power back to taxpayers, they've saved about $3 billion in the past 5 years, which is pretty good chunk of change. And school districts have actually been doing better. While their funding was decreased, they were also able to save the same amount of money on health care benefits, on pension benefits. Teacher salaries are actually, some people don't believe me on this, but teacher salaries have been increasing in the state of Wisconsin since we've passed Act 10 and collective bargaining reform. You have people that have better health care. Their pension is still fully funded in Wisconsin, one of the only states that can actually...
Let's not talk about that.
I mean, Act 10 in Wisconsin entirely turned around, especially education. That was one of the biggest impacts it had, and if you can do that in other states, you will see tremendous benefits. You know, classrooms, you have more activities, you have more involvement, you just have there's just so many good things that happen from collective bargaining reform that if it's something that is a possibility in a state, if you can take the protests for a few months, and you have a strong set of legislators who are willing to stand up to it and a governor who's willing to sign it, it's a great reform to do.
Yeah, it essentially gave teachers actually more power over how education actually worked in Wisconsin.
It also gave teachers the ability to say, I don't support what my union's doing, I don't want to give them money anymore.
Right.
And if you look to some of the state employee unions that we have in Wisconsin, AFSCME specifically lost about 60% of their membership. The WEAC membership, which is our biggest teachers union in Wisconsin, lost about half their membership. When you have people deciding that they, when they're no longer forced to be in a union, they can make that decision, you're noticing a very large amount of people are deciding to leave that union and saying, I know how to spend my $1,000 or $1,200 a year way better than the union does, and you take that power away from the union and you can accomplish so much more past that, from tax reform to education reform to healthcare reform. I mean, you take that power away and it really is tremendous.
We have one final question here.
Hi, my name is Jillian Brennus. I'm here on behalf of the Chicago Young Republicans, but I'm also announcing tomorrow the beginning of my campaign for state representative in the 56th district, so that's the northwestern suburbs. I used to be a Spanish junior high school teacher, and I never really aspired to be an administrator because I was concerned about my students and doing what's best for them. So I did go and studied public policy at the University of Chicago to see what policies really impact education and make it better for students. So my question for you is, are there any studies, I'm really concerned about this growth in administration, are there any studies that show, is this administrators just growing their salaries, or is it teachers aspiring to be leaders in their schools and so there's more administrators? Or are these people coming from outside who think that they can make a really good career in the education space as an administrator? So how is this administration number growing? That's what I'd like to ask.
That's a good question.
I was going to say, I would say that I don't know of any specific research on your exact question. But I would say that if it was teachers, which there's a lot of great teachers that become great administrators, I definitely don't want to say that there aren't teachers that are moving on in their careers that way. But if it was all amazing teachers that really cared about their students moving into administration, and we were growing at that pace because it was about the students, I don't think you would see flat test scores for years and years and years and years. If it was truly about making education better, I think we'd have better education.
Well, I could, with some of the stuff I've seen from before I actually came to Heartland, some of the research I was doing looking at salaries and stuff in local school districts, and some of the administrative growth was actually school districts bringing in social equity czars. They're bringing in more curriculum developers to talk about how they're going to implement Common Core and deal with all the testing. So, I mean, locally in the suburbs here, that's some of the growth on the administrative side that I've seen personally doing some research here.
Well, I think, what you're really talking about is how much are you spending on instructional in the classroom versus what's your operational cost. And I challenge you all to go back to your school districts, go back to your states, and do the metrics on it. And in many cases, instructional spending is less than half of the overall operational spending. So where's the money going? And that's always been my concern. Where is the money going? In Chicago, they spend over $15,000 per student. You do the math on that, 20 kids per classroom. Teacher costs, let's say, half of that. Well, where's the other half going when you include benefits and all that? Where's it going? I don't know. But I'd like to know, and I think that's where you need to get back to, because the money needs to go to the classroom.
Yep.